Professor, thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Early this morning.
It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, you know.
Democracy all over the place.
All over the place, democracy.
And yet, not enough to share.
Not enough democracy to share for the people. Absolutely, you're right.
What is going on? I mean, because when people had, I see that book, How Democracies Die. It was one of the books that I think Bishop Coker recommended at that particular event.
I'm going to recommend it too.
Oh, interesting.
It's an interesting book.
So
it speaks to the moment.
Are we witnessing? Well, since I don't want to believe so, I mean, I want to think that, because there were different layers to this discussion. Those who talked about the base of democracy, because if we accept that it's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, it means that the people are very important in this.
Absolutely.
And getting the right results from the onset, results that everybody accepts, results that everyone can say, well, yes, my candidate won fair and square, and my candidate lost fair and square, are very important.
Absolutely.
And then when the process of governance now starts, we now have to see that the three arms of government, the executive, legislature, and judiciary, are working as they ought to. These are the different intricate layers. And it would seem that, when you now break it down, different areas of, not just of the world, who say they practice democracy, seem to have challenges at different levels. Where is our own challenge currently?
Democracy is not just a system of government, or a method of managing human and material resources. Democracy is conversation, is dialogue. And there are two key features. Legal foundation of democracy and legitimate expression of that legality. What does that mean? You go through an electoral process and people get elected. They are sworn in on the basis of the constitutional text. That is legal. Legitimacy now derives from transforming the norms of that legality to impact positively on the lives of the people. That is governance. So it may be a legal government, but an illegitimate government. That level of illegitimacy, because there's poverty in the land, there is hunger everywhere, inflation is soaring, criminalities and terrorism and all manners of insecurities pervade the nation. And the government is apparently bemused, like this current one. That means you could be legal because you are properly constituted, but it is illegitimate because you have lost the fellowship of the people. That is when democracy breaks down. The breakdown of democracy begins to occur. That's what they found at that colloquium a few days ago. The breakdown of democracy means when you abandon the foundational norms of democracy and they begin to use instruments you've acquired in power to dismantle the guardrails that govern the democratic system. That is why How Democracies Die is an important book. It is not by firing a shot these days that democracy crumbles or dies, in the words of Obasanjo. It is by leveraging on those things that saw you to power. For example, what are the guardrails? The Constitution. What do you do with the Constitution? The matter in Rivers State, for example, is almost sub judice now because the PDP governors have gone to court. So we have to navigate carefully the boundaries of the conversation. But the abutment of democratic rule, and you find the sort of administrator strutting around Port Harcourt down, dismantling democratic infrastructure. It is not just taking a governor down, a parliament down. He's coming to implode the place, dissolve, of course, the cabinet, reconstituting local government, is appointing people. So it's creating almost a condition of finality. And you ask yourself, Mokwe, will you be invited to the South Governors Forum? Or will Bala Mohammed or PDP to extend invitation to you to attend the PDP Governors meeting? How does it start?
On Sunday, we saw that...
So if I find that the essence is that if you take democracy as a package, and then you have bought a significant chunk of it and reconstitute it, that regime has become a hybrid regime. And hybrid regime is a term that is part of the structure of competitive authoritarianism. When, as in the forum you are part of, you find that the guardrails of democratic governance are shrinking. Look at the liberal space. Look at the media. Look at civil society. Look at labor. Look at the parties.
Yeah, so
if there's a direct, vigorous corporate energy being deployed to manacle the spirit of the nation and then abort democratic institutions at all levels. The democracy is suffering. Democracy is dying. So it's not like a theoretical formulation. It's a practical thing we see every day. But it's incremental. So people don't see it. They see parliament that is in force. They see judiciary that is functioning. But you don't look at the content of the parliament. That, for example, you must do something in a specific way and it's done in another way. You must affirm something for the proclamation in a specific constitutionally provided way. But he didn't do it. But there's parliament that did it. Or secondly, that a woman, a senator, said, I am harassed. That is allegation. It's not even been proved. Start a process of record immediately. And it's being facilitated. But it's still done within the ambits of the law in quote. That is brain of democracy. Or a governor, Bala Mohammed of Bauchi State, because he's reviving PDP with the board of trustees and so on there, chasing away those they call the undertakers in the party and the quislings. Suddenly the EFCC is persecuting the state. So, because the EFCC is the legal institution, he can't say he shouldn't do his job. But you are now leveraging on those elements, institutional elements. You find in the system that should protect democracy and democratic governance. You're weaponizing them. The judiciary, in the coercive authorities of the state, if a journalist speaks out of turn, they knock on the door. If you come to a certain program and you're not strong enough, like I'm strong enough, they tell you, hello, you shouldn't be saying what they're saying. If you call an IG of police, a local IG of police, it's your right in law, in the Constitution to do so. They knock on your door. That is criminal cyber stalking. These are things which you find in the system of governance, but you are distorting, diluting, and transmogrifying them in a way and manner that is shortening that democratic conversation. That is what we find as the legacy of the Bola Tinubu presidency at this critical stage of the evolution as a nation.
I think it's important to say that, the conversation generally bordered on democracy across Africa. Yes, much as people are, they certainly will zero in on their own experience.
Absolutely, that's what it should be.
But, you made a very interesting point about legality and legitimacy. And you spoke about how when hardships increase, that could make a government look like it's illegitimate, despite the legality, fulfilling the legal processes through which it came to power.
But do you know the Arab Spring?
Yes, I was just about to go there, because we don't even have to go that far. We see, just right in, our neighboring countries, what transpired, Burkina Faso, Mali, when they experienced the schools. We saw initially that the people were full of joy, and every now and again you get to see, things that they say the new military commander in Burkina Faso
let me
is
come
doing.
in there, but that's a note of caution. Democracy in its unalloyed form, in the form in which it approximates the sensibilities, the interests and needs of the people, remains the best form of government. Nobody is interested in the quick fix method of military regimes or calling on democratic backsliding as a pathway to African revival or renaissance. Understood?
Yes, so yes. That's the question I wanted to ask, because interestingly, just yesterday, Mr. Osita Chidoka was on this program, and he talked about how in the last 1 year or so, there have been significant improvement in many aspects of governance. He talked about how, prices were coming down, the dollar has stabilized, blah, blah, blah. But he said that, what has happened in Rivers and a number of other places has the potential to derail, to roll back some of the gains. So there'll be questions to be asked as to, if a government inherits, an inherently difficult state of the economy and has to take very painful decisions for the people, for us to be able to get out of there. Because let's not make let's make no mistake. What a lot of Nigerians are currently going through, are severe hardships that they haven't seen perhaps since the military era. So I want to know, at what point do we say that this is what is necessary? This is something that we must go through to come out of prosperous on the other side. At what point do we begin to say that?
It's important to say, planning for democratic governance is very key. And I won't be tired of stressing it. President Bola Tinubu came to office May 29. There was apparently no plan. There was no government. Buhari had left, but left in such a way that the regime of subsidy who have persisted for at least a month or two after the swearing in. And the new parliament could have even extended it legally for more consultations. For even the adjudicatory process of that election to have been concluded by the Supreme Court. Nothing could stop the Presidential Commission appointed by the president to come together to say, we have these deep challenges you're talking about. We can't manage the economy anymore. But on the day of the swearing, he says subsidy is gone. Without a government in place, without even the Secretary of State, Secretary of the Government of Federation, without even the Chief of Staff, without the cabinet. That is, for me, not only irrational and illogical, situational and episodic and incoherent. And followed up quickly with flotation of the naira. We don't even have the benchmark to say this is the policy framework. For 2 years, virtually 2 years, we have been plunged into this disaster because of thoughtless presidential proclamations, which you don't find anywhere in a very vigorous and rigorous policy document, backing like a mixed document, but in a part document, where you can reference on where you're sitting and say, I have pages this is the program. There's no program. So even if the people are suffering and you need to aggressively address it, like saying you need a mad medicine to cure a madman, that medicine must have its material properties well worked out, chemical composition, side effects. We don't have it. That is why people are still, as you have pointed out, suffering at every level: transportation, feeding, medical, supplies, hospital bills, drugs. So my great friend Chidok, I don't know the science is saying or the data is reading, there's nothing coming down. The foodstuffs prices are not coming down. Hospital bills are not coming down. I have been sick for 3-4 days. I know what I'm going through to take care of myself. The idea is that a government, you will always meet challenges. But when the challenges appear so overwhelming, you cannot begin to dismantle democratic governance incrementally in order to solve the problem. Neither can you overwhelm the people, with intemperate energy and force, which is what this government is currently doing. That is why you find the assemblage of African stars, the Bishop Kuka, President Obasanjo and the rest of the country, talking about democracy dying. It is not a theoretical statement. It's a practical manifestation of where we are today. And when you turn around, Mugban said, what has happened in Rivers? We can't predict what the outcome will be. But we can say here on this table that you remember the name of Adetokunbo Ademola. Remember Louis Mbanefo. You remember Daddy Onyama. Remember Showe Mimo. Remember, Mama Nasir. Remember Josiani Agolo. Remember Irikive. Remember Baseki. Remember Oputa. The list goes on and on. Yeah. You ask yourself, this current Supreme Court, where do they stand in the galaxy of this stars, in this pantheon of judicial icons and immortals? The case before them will either lead into the infamy, hall of infamy, where do they down, or where they can take their pride of place with these great names I've mentioned. Because the matter of Rivers, which we're not going to discuss in terms of its legal composition or content, is one of the clearest indicators yet that a hybrid regime has loosened the guardrails of democracy, unfettered itself, and is prepared to say, Benue, we're not ready for this. We're not yet there. Oshun, no, give it Oshun. Oh, Adamawa, are you sure he's not ready for it? He cannot begin to pick and choose how you dismember democracy and reconstitute it with a sole administrator who is shutting down governance space.
Mr. Udenta, I think it's very important for me to just say very clearly what Mr. Chidok has said, because apparently he also wrote it down in a post of his on X, and I think he was trying to make the point. The title of the post was President Tinubu's Own Goal, a tale of the lizard who ruined his mother's funeral by his own hand. That was the title of his post. And when he was talking about key indicators that were beginning to show that Nigeria was turning the corner economically, he was pointing to foreign portfolio investments, which were on the rise, Naira stabilizing, food prices beginning to correct, showing evidence in major markets, rice, beans, and tomatoes falling by 15 to 20%, external reserves strengthening. These are some of the things that he pointed to, but he was saying that the president took a wrong turn at his finest moment. Nigeria stands at the precipice of self-inflicted crisis. That was the point he was making.
Okay, well, actually, like I said, I wasn't witness to that and I didn't watch that show, but the point I'm making is very clear, that even if you try to be as differential as possible with these figures and numbers, You know.
You think you're being differential?
Yes, because being differential, because I have bought drugs in the past 2 or 3 months. I have comorbidities, something I can say on air. I have high blood pressure and hypertension, and I have sugar issues. These are not things which you hide. I know what the drugs cost me across board. My wife actually has to stock drugs every time, and she buys foodstuffs in quantity. She buys from markets. I don't the market other people are talking about. I don't see that drop. And when it's called portfolio investment, what does that mean? Portfolio investment simply means portfolio investment. The climate may not be as cloudy as it was 2, 3, 4 months ago, but we have not come out of the woods even in that regard. We have not come out in any single particular material, significant element. And then, like he brilliantly pointed out too, to compound delicate, slow-paced sort of recovery, which are imperceptible even for the people. Because sometimes these numbers don't reflect the material condition of the people.
That's true.
And then suddenly you now, because, okay, take MBS. The statistics bound. Oh, inflation dropped by 2. Oh, it dropped by 4, dropped by 5. This is a number juggling. Because you ask the woman who sells pure water or her booker food, how her life is treating her. You have a young student or copper. How much do you spend on Uber, on board? It hasn't dropped. The quality of life has not depreciated to the level of people being animalized and imbecilized.
I know that Ayo.
Under this government.
I know that Ayo has questions for you, Prof. Let's go to Lagos.
Thank you, Mark. Prof, you know, there are those who would point to you straight away that these issues are not new. As a matter of fact, it was in 1983, I think, that the government of the day in the Second Republic declared what they called austerity measures. And despite all of that effort within those, following the first 4-year term of the Shagari government, they tried these austerity measures, hoping that it would at least ameliorate some of, well, do one thing or the other to the people. Since that time until now, it has only gotten worse. And it would seem like the trajectory has been, it's been difficult to arrest that trajectory. Do you think we've been able to learn from history in our electioneering, in our democracy? Because, as you would also agree, several people will point out that some of the issues we're dealing with, they're unfortunately not new to us. And it would seem like we just allowed them willy-nilly.
Okay. Your last time I was here, I guess you were in Lagos too, and Mugbe was sitting with me, and the leader of the business movement, was sitting here. And this kind of question even came up, and I said, okay, at the turn of the century, what we call now the African century, there was an OAU, bettered in 1963. But then visionary leaders of the moment, 1999, 2000, said, these things seem to have outlived its usefulness. We need to recalibrate it to suit the new historical age. President Obasanjo of Nigeria, with the flicker of Algeria, and then Mbeki of South Africa, put their heads together, summoned the other leaders of the continent, and they repackaged it as AU, African Union, much more mobile, much more content-driven, much more programmatic and development-based. 3 or 4 things stood out. I'm answering your question, Ayo. 3 or 4 things stood out. African peer review mechanism, where the leaders will subject themselves to periodic texts on benchmarks and measurable indices to say, how are you performing across board in Africa? Corruption, governance, development, and so on. 2, NEPAD, the new Partnership for African Development, which is sure to still be alive in Nigeria today, but you and I should know whether it is breathing, whether it is crawling, whether it is actually in a comatose state. What is that? The Millennium African Program, MAP, and the Omega Plan, which the Western world repackaged through Japan, blended to form NEPAD, partnerships between Africa and the world, then within African states, and then between the public sector and the private sector. Obasanjo domesticated it. It's from NEPAD now, we now grew out NEEDS document, National Economic Empowerment Development Strategy. At the state level, the SEEDS document. At the local level, the LEADS document, with Soludo there and as Governor Central, Chief Advisor to the President on Economy, being the driver of that project. You have a document before you, you can turn pages and say, this is how you build development in a democracy. This is the content that the global war then was under the MDGs. Millennium Development, not the SDGs now, the MDGs then, from the global to the continental and part to the needs. I ask you, what document do we have before us today, since Bola Ahmed Tinubu became president, that is guiding our trajectory? I use 3 terms. episodic, situational, and incoherent. On one branch, his subsidy is gone. The other side is flotation, tariffs, and taxes, and now possibly dismantling democratic infrastructure with the hype on being reversed. You don't find any coordinate lines between all this.
But Prof,
so that is why, as 1983 you talked about, we had the challenges then, Obasanjo at least tried to put together a package that is very well thought out. It may not be the best, it may not be without flaws, but something you can work with. We need hope. In what direction? 3 planks: anti-corruption, security, and economy. None is working.
You know, there are those who would also remind you, Prof,
studio,
just 1 second.
I said in this studio, Ayo, that 2 years will be the maximum this government will have. Without distraction, already you can see the distraction. We've moved to another topic of coalition building. 2027, it is swinging in. And what is swinging in, the government will respond in a radical manner in order to prepare for re-election. That means governance will slow down.
But Prof, at the end of the day, just 1 second, Prof, because we're running out of time. At the end of the day, Prof, it boils down to the people. I've listened to some security operatives over the years say a city gets the kind of police it deserves. The same thing some would say a country gets the kind of politicians or governments that it deserves. So let's take it to the people. Because when we talk about democracy, most of the time we're talking about the political class, we're talking about democratic infrastructure. But the most sophisticated infrastructure of them should be the people. How well do you think we're doing in terms of making the people the bastion of democracy indeed, and not just the cannon fodders?
Okay, very correct. I think I get you there. I had a conversation with a major political leader, no point mentioning name. He said, let's look at what we call this democracy. And I've said it on the same studio here. 230 million Nigerians, presumably something in between, 93 million registered voters, 20% thereabout of those registered voters who cast their vote in the last election, and the current president scored 37%, an F score of the 20% of the 93 million. That means this government has no mandate, actually. But the Constitution permits a mandate. That means the first level of even inoculating democracy with this kind of aberration is to say, if you don't have the 50% voter turnout, I will find a way to do it. This election will not be legitimate. Because the implication is that 30,000 people can elect a president in a country of 230 million people. So the people are talking about are not even represented because they didn't even cast their vote. The persons who rule them maybe have a mandate of 12.
Just a second, Prof.
5% vote.
Just a second, Prof. So which is the problem, wouldn't you?
Democratic governance.
Yes.
I'm not saying that you don't have a government in place because the Constitution has said this is the way.
Prof, just 1 second. On the point you made about the people, that is the problem, isn't it? That the people are not as sophisticated democratically or in terms of elections or even voter education and all of that as they should be. Can we then say
because
just a second,
requirement because the people themselves the people themselves in singularities cannot affect this kind of potent change.
When they have
so
then, Prof,
just amendment to the Constitution.
Just a second.
This is the threshold for you to have an election.
Prof, just 1 second.
That election.
I'd like you to stick with
representational democracy.
Yeah.
It is important for you to fix it at the level of constitution making.
I need you to speak to our infrastructures around the people. Speak to the infrastructures around building a people that will sustain democracy. Because the politicians today, Prof, let's be real. At the end of the day, no matter what the system is, no matter what the policy is, no matter what the Constitution is, no matter what the document is, it's still about the people. But if the people are not sophisticated enough to power, to run, to use those instruments that we have created, what then is the use? We've always complained about the fact that at the end of the day, no matter what it is, just a second, Prof, that no matter what the issue is, it all comes back down to implementation. And if the people who are supposed to implement it are not aware, are not educated, then what is the use? So how do we build that kind of people that can sustain democracy and make sure it doesn't die in Nigeria?
I get your point. Take the voting method, for example. Before 2015, you just go with your card and cast a vote. If you are not captured, you give incident form in which you fail, you vote. From there, we move to card reader. It's an improvement in the law. from the candidate to beavers, from beavers to IREV. People still complain with the IREV, but people will say, oh, if you throw your mind back 10 years ago, it is a far better electoral process, a better environment we have, where you cannot have mutilated result, you don't have a brutal speech, card speech, a ton everywhere. In the same way, if you have an amendment, I understand the power of civic space mobilization to convince those who make the law to say, the threshold for legitimate election is 50% voter turnout. One. Second, representational democracy means if a APC had 37%, it should have 37% of parliament. PDP, 26%, Labour, 24%. That is inclusive.
So you're recommending that as well?
It makes more sense in a liberal democratic space we have now to say, how can you have 37%, you're not shutting that democratic space everywhere? Yeah, it's a failure, it's an F.
Mr. Peter also, made the same case.
That is actually when I talked about my conversation with the leader, a major important leader. That's Peter B.
Okay.
It's his viewpoint, and I think it's actually a global viewpoint. First past the goalpost is no longer workable. What works now is that this party has 37% in the last election. This one 27%, this one 26%. You combine even those with 5% threshold, they get into office. So in the parliament, you find a robust debate and conversation and contestation of ideas. And not this kind of caricature democracy you find with a parliament that has lost his head and the Senate president that you don't do the rubber stamp whenever the president sends across for him to do.
Well, I know that the National Assembly will certainly have, a different...
Oh, sure, they should. And I'm here to take them on that.
Let me bring you up. Let me quickly ask you this as we wrap up now. We understand that the tenure of the current INEC chair, because we talked about the different levels to this democracy and how the election process is extremely important to it. Just to also add quickly, because we're talking about 90 million people or so on the voters register. A few CSOs have come up to say that we need a more credible register. They are doubting that
the number actually is up to that, or more than that.
Exactly. So they want a clean voter
register. Rules is important.
But just as we now understand that. The tenure of the INEC chairman will be expiring in November, and it looks like they already plans to start shopping for
somebody else.
Yeah, what is the criteria? Because there are those who say the president should not be, invested with the power to appoint a new chairman for INEC. They think that a different process should be involved in bringing up. What would you recommend?
It requires a servant leader.
Excuse me.
A servant leader who understands his place in history and legacy wants to leave.
The question is, who should appoint him?
I'm coming to that. Because you have the constitutional parameters now, which you cannot breach or distort, already in place. But if you have a servant leader, like Late Yaradua, who said, I don't know whether this election I won it really. Let us have a conversation about electoral reform. And he set up a panel to say, it was a difficult election for everybody. We don't want it to happen again after me. It was what that embraced the Niger militants. That's what he called forbearance. The current president, Bola will say, oh, Obasanjo appointed INEC chairman. Maybe Yar'Adua appointed, Jonathan appointed, maybe Buhari appointed, I must appoint my own. But the forbearance simply means, I've seen that it doesn't work. That doesn't make for inclusive democratic conversation. It doesn't make for so-called transparency, probity, and openness. They will always accuse the person they appointed as somebody who is going to be loyal to you. We defer to you, and we may fix the election for you. Jonathan went closer enough to say, I have never met President Jagai in my life. I don't even know him. But they say he's a good man and highly skilled and qualified. But sometimes the president would like to know who the person is. In law, if he can't amend the constitution now in order to deny the president that power, as it should be done, is the president himself will rise to the moral occasion to say, I have this power, but I can even orchestrate a constitutional amendment to say, I don't think I need this kind of power. But who will do it for the president with a clear moral contour and moral compass? The way this current government is going, the way they're shutting that democratic conversation, he appointing some administrators, combining National Assembly to do whatever there, and possibly hiring the judiciary here and there. And they're terrorizing political parties and civil society and level. I don't know whether this government is the right one to do it.